Everett Kane thought he was doing a favor by inviting the ugliest girl in school to the alumni ball, until the ballroom doors opened, and every head turned to her, not in mockery, but in awe. What happened to Franny Dillard left him speechless and completely unprepared for what came next. Everett Kane stared at the glowing screen of his MacBook, the cursor blinking beside the words, Fairhope High Alumni Ball, 15 years later. His assistant had forwarded him the invite a week ago, and he had ignored it, assuming it would be another sad gathering of middle-aged people pretending they weren't living for nostalgia. But tonight, something compelled him to look again. Maybe it was the silence of his glass-walled penthouse, or the fact that his latest company had just sold for $180 million and he didn't feel anything. He scrolled past the RSVP button and landed on the public comments thread beneath the post. At first it was filled with typical chatter. Can't wait to see everyone. Remember Mr. Carville's hairpiece? Until one thread caught his eye. If Everett Kane shows up, someone should dare him to take Franny the Frog again. Wait, is she even alive? Didn't she move to Europe or something? Or maybe she's a nun? Nope, Frances Dillard. She's back in town. Biomedical something. I saw her name on the hospital website. He froze. Frances Dillard, Franny. The name tugged at something long buried. High school memories flooded in. Football games under stadium lights, the smell of cheap cologne and hairspray at prom, and the cruel little inside jokes that weren't funny when said out loud. Franny had been a quiet girl with thick glasses, acne scars, and a stammer. Socially invisible, except when made into a punchline. Everett couldn't remember ever having a real conversation with her, but he could remember laughing with the others when she tripped on stage. He could remember the way she looked at the floor, as if the ceiling had more rights than her. He shut the laptop for a moment, leaning back in his leather chair. He was 33 now, divorced, famous, rich, and empty. Something itched inside him. He opened his email, searched Frances Dillard, and sure enough, there she was in a staff photo on the local hospital's website. But she didn't look like Franny the Frog anymore. The woman in the picture had calm eyes, a confident tilt to her chin, and a quiet intelligence in her gaze. Not exactly conventionally glamorous, but dignified, unrecognizable. Without giving himself more time to overthink, he hit compose and typed, Subject Alumni Ball. Frances, I hope this doesn't come off as strange. I saw your name in the Fairhope alumni post and realized it's been a long time. I know we didn't talk much in high school. Actually, maybe we didn't talk at all, but I'd be honored if you'd consider being my guest to the ball. No expectations, just thought it might be nice to reconnect. Everett Kane. He hovered over the send button, unsure if this was a noble gesture or some strange attempt to settle an ancient score with his past self. But before he could change his mind, his finger clicked. The message was gone. And for the first time in years, Everett felt nervous. Not about business or public image or investments, but about what she might say. Fran Dillard was sitting at her small kitchen table when the email came through. The overhead light flickered slightly. The building was old and always seemed to groan with the weight of its own history. But her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, unmoving. Her thumb hovered over the trackpad, heart tapping out an uneven rhythm in her chest. The name Everett Kane felt like a ghost pressing its palm to the back of her neck. She read the email again. I'd be honored if you'd consider being my guest to the ball. She stared at the words, half expecting them to dissolve into a cruel prank. But there it was, his name, his tone oddly sincere. No winks, no jokes, no emojis. Just a man asking a woman he barely remembered to join him at a reunion they had both probably been dreading. Fran leaned back slowly and took a deep breath, trying to ignore the swirl of emotions beginning to rise. The name Franny the Frog hadn't been uttered to her face in years, but it lived in her memory like graffiti carved into stone. She had spent the better part of a decade shedding the skin of that girl, getting out of that town, going to college, earning 2 degrees, and eventually joining a biomedical mission overseas, where she spent 5 years designing prosthetics for children who had lost limbs in war zones. Work that gave her a reason to believe pain had purpose. But despite the growth, the accomplishments, the healing, she had never attended a reunion, never responded to old classmates who messaged her with half-hearted apologies or Facebook friend requests. She had no interest in reviving a version of herself that had been discarded by everyone else. Until now. Was this Everett Kane's idea of redemption, guilt, charity? Or was it possible he had changed? She got up, poured herself a glass of water, and walked to the window. Outside, the quiet street held the stillness of late spring. A couple walked by holding hands. A teenager zipped past on a bike. Life had moved on, as it always did. So had she. But something about this request made her pause. Fran had always believed closure came from within, that you didn't need apologies or vindication to reclaim your story. But maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity to show her former self that she'd become everything they said she couldn't. She returned to her laptop and placed her fingers on the keyboard, hesitating for a second longer before typing. Everett, I appreciate your message. I'd be glad to attend the alumni ball with you. So Fran. She hit send, closed the lid, and exhaled a slow, thoughtful breath. She wasn't doing this for him. She was doing it for the girl who sat alone in the cafeteria all 4 years, sketching designs for robotic limbs in her notebook, and wondering if anyone would ever see her beyond the surface. And this time they would. The evening of the alumni ball arrived with a crisp breeze and a golden sky stretched across Fairhope. Everett stood at the entrance of the Civic Center, adjusting the cuff of his tailored navy suit, his jaw tight with anticipation. The venue glowed with warm uplighting, casting soft light across glass doors and manicured hedges. Alumni were already arriving, some in pairs, some in clusters, all buzzing with laughter and memories. He checked his watch again. 6:58 p.m. A red carpet lined the walkway to the doors, flanked by volunteer greeters handing out glossy name tags with graduation photos printed beside each name. Everett declined his. He didn't need to see his 17-year-old face smirking in a tux, pretending to have all the answers. From the corner of his eye, he noticed several former classmates stealing glances at him, nudging each other as they whispered. He was used to attention, but tonight it didn't feel like praise. It felt like he was under a microscope. Then a sleek black sedan turned the corner. His breath caught as the door opened, and out stepped a woman he didn't recognize, until she turned her face toward the light. Fran. Her hair was pulled into a low twist at the nape of her neck, elegant and understated. She wore a deep sapphire velvet gown that hugged her figure with quiet confidence. No glasses, no insecurity in her shoulders. Her eyes, the same warm brown as he remembered, were steady and unflinching as they met his. All around them murmurs erupted. No way. Is that Franny? That can't be her. Did she get work done? Everett took a slow step forward and offered his hand. You look absolutely stunning. Fran tilted her head slightly. Thank you. You clean up well, too. There was a pause, not awkward, but heavy. The weight of time, of old roles undone, hung between them like fog. Shall we? Everett gestured toward the building. As they walked inside together, the reaction from the crowd was immediate. Heads turned. Some smiled with disbelief. A few mouths hung slightly open. Everett could hear someone gasp behind him. He felt it all. The surprise, the jealousy, the disbelief, but most of all, the silent calculation. Was this a publicity stunt? A long joke? Was she here to get revenge? He looked at Fran, who walked with grace and poise, entirely unbothered. Her gaze didn't wander. She didn't seek validation. She was simply present. They approached the check-in table where a woman with perfectly curled blonde hair nearly dropped her pen. Fran, Dillard? She asked, blinking rapidly. Fran nodded calmly. Yes. Everett leaned slightly closer and whispered, Still want to run out the back? She smirked. You have no idea how often I've imagined this night. But not once did I think I'd be the one walking in like this. He nodded. I didn't either. Music spilled from the ballroom, an upbeat jazz ensemble playing something cheerful and fast. They stepped inside. Chandeliers glistened above, and clusters of former classmates sipped wine and exchanged dramatic hugs. Then Everett heard it, the name. Franny the Frog? He turned sharply. A man near the bar, probably a former teammate, squinted in disbelief. But Fran didn't even flinch. She turned, gave a polite smile, and simply said, "It's Fran. Just Fran now." Then she turned back to Everett and offered him her arm. "Let's find our table, shall we?" And with that the balance shifted. The girl who once blended into the wallpaper had just walked into the room like a queen, and Everett realized something unsettling. She wasn't the one who had changed the most. He was, because for the first time in his life he wasn't the center of the story. She was. The ballroom swelled with voices, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Dozens of round tables were arranged beneath the chandeliers, each draped in white linen and marked with small metallic numbers. Everett and Fran found their seats at table 7, directly beside the dance floor. The space was beautifully arranged, with flickering candles in glass holders and floral centerpieces made of white lilies and eucalyptus, simple, tasteful, elegant. Fran sat tall, her shoulders relaxed, her movements unhurried. Everett couldn't help but glance at her every few moments. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because her presence was still, commanding, unapologetic. It unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. As the waiter brought 2 glasses of wine to their table, Fran gently reached for hers, offering a quiet, "Thank you." Then her eyes shifted across the room. People were looking, whispering, pretending not to stare but failing miserably. And then came the inevitable. Carrie Wallace. She descended on them like a bird of prey, clad in shimmering silver, her signature smile polished to a perfect, passive-aggressive sheen. Once the reigning queen of Fairhope High, Carrie still carried herself like the homecoming crown was somewhere on her head. "Oh my God," she drawled, placing manicured hands on the back of Fran's chair. "Franny Dillard? Is that really you?" Fran turned with calm precision. "Hello, Carrie. It's Fran now." Carrie laughed a little too loudly. "Oh, wow, just wow. I mean, look at you. I barely recognized you without the glasses and the. She made a vague gesture around her own face. "The whole thing," Everett narrowed his eyes. "Carrie." But Fran gently rested her hand on his arm. "It's okay." Carrie leaned in closer. "You're here with Everett? As in Everett Kane? Our Everett? This is wild. She added, looking at him, "you once made a bet in chemistry class that you'd ask her out if she wore heels for a week. Remember that?" Everett's expression hardened. "Yeah, and I also remember how cruel we all were." Carrie blinked, caught off guard by his tone. She gave a strained smile. "Well, people change, or at least some of us do." Then she straightened, gave Fran one last long look, and said sweetly, "Glad you could join us, Fran. Seriously. Good for you." She walked off, her heels clicking like little daggers against the floor. Fran said nothing for a while, simply watching the candle flame dance. "I'm sorry," Everett said, "for what she said, for what I said back then, for what I didn't say." Fran took a slow sip of wine. "I don't need an apology for every wound I've already healed." He looked at her surprised. "You really have let it all go, haven't you?" She turned her head and met his eyes directly. "No, Everett, I didn't let it go. I transformed it. There's a difference." Just then, someone at the mic announced a group photo near the stage. The room began to shift, people rising from their tables. Fran stood up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Come on," she said, offering a small smile. "Let's give them something new to remember." He followed her without a word. As they walked toward the flash of cameras and murmurs of disbelief, Everett realized he wasn't bringing Fran into the spotlight. She had built it herself. And now he was lucky just to be standing beside her. After the photo session, the band began to play a slow jazz number. Couples moved to the dance floor, drifting beneath the soft haze of golden lights. Laughter mingled with melody as memories flowed freely through the air, some authentic, some exaggerated by years of distance. Everett and Fran returned to their table in silence, though the air between them buzzed with unspoken thoughts. Everett finally broke it. "Can I ask you something?" Fran raised an eyebrow. "Sure. Why did you say yes?" "To tonight?" she asked, gently swirling the wine in her glass. He nodded. She looked thoughtful for a moment, her gaze focused beyond him, toward a point only she could see. "When I was in grad school," she began, "there was this girl in my building who used to cry in the stairwell every Thursday night. Same spot, same time. She wouldn't speak, just sat there, tears pouring down her cheeks, like it was part of her schedule. One night I finally sat beside her. I didn't say anything. I just handed her a tissue and waited." Everett leaned in, listening carefully. "After a few weeks, she finally told me she cried every Thursday because it was the only day she let herself feel everything she bottled up the rest of the week. Shame, fear, memories." Fran's eyes flickered. "I used to be like that, too. Except my Thursdays lasted for years." She paused and met his eyes. "You were one of those memories, Everett. Not the worst, but sharp enough." Everett swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I didn't realize how much damage I was part of." "That's the thing," she said quietly. "You never do when you're the one with the microphone." He sat back, guilt blooming in his chest like smoke. "I've thought a lot about who I used to be, and I hated that guy for a while. I was arrogant, shallow, addicted to attention. But lately I've been more afraid that I haven't changed at all." Fran tilted her head, considering him. "You have. Maybe not all the way, but you're not that 17-year-old anymore." He looked down. "I still feel like I should be doing more to make this right." Fran gave a small, almost sad smile. "You think closure is something you can give someone like a gift bag, but it's not. It's a door you walk through alone. I've already walked through mine." Everett looked up. "Then why come here? Why accept the invite?" Fran's gaze softened. "Because the girl I used to be deserved to see this moment, to see how little power those memories hold now, and to stand in front of the same people who once laughed, and not feel the need to shrink." For a long moment neither spoke. Then the band shifted to a different tune, smoother, more romantic. Couples filled the dance floor, swaying in slow circles beneath the lights. Everett stood and offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" Fran looked at him. "Why?" "Because you're the strongest person in this room," he said. "And I want to be the one who gets to dance with her, even just for one song." She smiled, not out of vanity or validation, but from something deeper, the kind of smile that came from a place of peace. She took his hand. "All right, one song." They stepped onto the dance floor, surrounded by laughter and music and the ghost of a past that no longer held either of them hostage. And as Everett held her gently and they moved together in rhythm, he realized that this night wasn't about fixing the past. It was about honoring the transformation that had come after. The music faded, replaced by the gentle hum of conversation and clinking glasses. As Fran and Everett stepped off the dance floor, a volunteer with a clipboard approached the stage and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we're now inviting alumni to come up and share a few words. Memories, updates, stories. Keep it short and sweet." A few people chuckled nervously. Then a gray-haired man in khakis took the mic and began a light-hearted story about his failed garage band. Laughter rippled through the room. Next came a former valedictorian who talked about her nonprofit. Then a guy in a loud shirt recounted a prank he once pulled involving the school mascot and a gallon of shaving cream. The room relaxed, the wine loosened everyone's nerves, and then, unexpectedly, Everett rose from his seat. Fran looked up, surprised. "You sure?" He hesitated, then gave her a soft nod. "I think I need to." He walked slowly to the mic, his posture a mixture of confidence and humility. The room quieted as his face came into view. People leaned forward. After all, Everett Kane wasn't just a millionaire. He was a symbol of what they once thought success looked like. He took the mic in his hand, cleared his throat, and looked around the room. "I used to think this place was the peak of everything. That high school defined who we were, who we'd always be. Back then, I measured people by how loud they were, how many people knew their name, how good they looked on a football field. And by that metric, I was on top. Some people laughed, others nodded. But the truth is, he continued, I was measuring the wrong things. And because of that, I missed out on knowing some of the most remarkable people I've ever met. He paused, glanced toward Fran, who held his gaze without flinching. There was a girl here, smart, kind, incredibly resilient. But I never saw her, not really, because I was too busy making sure people saw me. The room grew very still. I came tonight expecting to feel nostalgia, maybe even pride. Instead, I feel something much rarer, humility and gratitude for second chances. He smiled faintly, nodded once more, and handed back the mic. There was no applause at first, just a silence that hung heavy and meaningful. Then slowly it began, a few claps, then more, until the entire room broke into steady, genuine applause. Everett returned to the table, where Fran sat with unreadable eyes. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I know, he replied, but I did it anyway. She studied him for a long moment. You meant every word. He nodded. And then, for the first time since she'd arrived, Fran looked away, not to hide, but to hold back the unexpected sting in her eyes. Not pain, something warmer. I never expected you to be the one to say what everyone else was afraid to. He looked at her with a quiet intensity. Maybe it just took me 15 years to find the courage. They sat in silence for a moment as the next speaker approached the mic. But the night had shifted. Not for the room, for them. Because sometimes the most powerful apology isn't the one you give privately. It's the one you give out loud when the world is watching. Later that night, after the speeches dwindled and the buffet was picked clean, the ballroom began to thin. A few tables remained full, old friends swapping inside jokes, couples reminiscing, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. The music softened into background jazz as the band began to pack up. Waitstaff cleared plates and replaced melting candles. Fran sat at the table, sipping sparkling water, her posture still composed but quieter now, introspective. Everett returned from the hallway, having taken a brief call. When he sat down beside her again, she spoke first. I didn't expect tonight to be so revealing. He looked at her. For you or for them? Both, she said, but mostly for me. She paused, then added, You know, when I accepted your invitation, part of me thought I was walking into a trap. Like maybe it would all collapse the moment I stepped inside. Like someone would laugh, or spill a drink, or whisper something cruel. Everett's jaw tensed, guilt flashing across his face. But that didn't happen, she said, because I'm not that girl anymore. And they're not 17 anymore either. He leaned forward. You're right, but I need to be honest about something. Fran's brow lifted slightly, waiting. I didn't invite you just to make amends. I told myself that's why, but it was more than that. When I saw your photo on the hospital website, something hit me. You weren't just changed, you were grounded, strong. The kind of strong that comes from surviving things no one should have had to. And it shook me, because I realized I had never built anything in my life that came from pain. Just ambition, just ego. Fran looked at him closely now, her expression unreadable. I wanted to be near someone who did what I couldn't, Everett said. Turn scars into steel. Fran took a breath, steady and slow. You've built empires, Everett. He shook his head. But never a soul. You built yours. They sat in silence, the ballroom humming quietly around them. And then, from a table nearby, a familiar face approached. Mr. Callahan, their old English teacher, now older, thinner, but still sharp-eyed and wearing that same bow tie. Franny, he said warmly. Mr. Callahan, she said with a genuine smile, standing to hug him. My goodness, he said, stepping back. You look like yourself, the real one, the one I always hoped the world would eventually see. She chuckled. Thank you, that means more than you know. He turned to Everett, gave him a knowing look. Takes a brave man to bring the girl everyone underestimated. But it takes an even braver man to admit she surpassed them all. Everett smiled sheepishly. I'm just trying to keep up now. Mr. Callahan winked and returned to his table. When Fran sat again, her voice was softer. You know, I used to imagine this night 100 different ways, but never like this. How did you imagine it? I don't know, she said thoughtfully. Something dramatic, maybe a speech, maybe someone finally apologizing, maybe people asking me how I got pretty. But the truth is, I didn't need any of that. She looked up at him. All I needed was to walk in that door and not feel small. Everett looked at her with admiration, not as someone trying to fix the past, but as a man who had finally learned how to listen. You were never small, Fran, he said. We just didn't know how to see you. She gave him a quiet, genuine smile. And for the first time that night, it wasn't about the past, or the people around them, or the versions of themselves they had tried so hard to shed. It was just two people finally meeting in the middle of who they truly were. As the clock crept toward midnight, the last song of the evening floated through the dimmed ballroom. Most of the guests had left, their laughter fading into the parking lot, high heels clicking on concrete, hugs exchanged under stars and street lamps. Only a few tables remained occupied now, scattered remnants of a long, emotional night. Fran stood by the window, gazing out at the empty school field beyond the Civic Center. The place where homecoming games were once played, where chants once echoed, where someone like her had only ever sat in the back row, unseen. Everett approached slowly, hands in his pockets, tie loosened, jacket folded over one arm. He stopped beside her but didn't speak. She broke the silence. Funny how quiet this place becomes when the crowd leaves. He nodded. Some places are louder with ghosts than people. She turned to face him, something reflective in her eyes, something almost tender. Tonight wasn't what I expected, but I think it was exactly what I needed. Me too, he said. I came here thinking I was doing something noble, inviting the girl no one ever invited. But you weren't the one who needed saving. Fran tilted her head. That was never your job. He smiled faintly. But I'm grateful you let me walk beside you tonight. They stood in stillness, the last saxophone notes fading behind them. Then Everett glanced toward the exit. Want to get out of here? He asked. Fran raised an eyebrow. You mean like ditch the after party? I mean, actually talk. No music, no whispers, just us. Somewhere quiet. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. A short drive later, they found themselves sitting at a 24-hour diner just outside the city. It was nearly empty, just a college kid with headphones and an elderly couple quietly sharing pie. The waitress brought them coffee without asking. They talked, not about high school, not about who they used to be. They talked about where they'd gone after, about Fran's work in Uganda, designing prosthetics for landmine survivors, about Everett's divorce, and how losing his marriage forced him to examine every part of his identity. They spoke about grief, pressure, silence, solitude, and reinvention. And in that small, unremarkable booth beneath humming fluorescent lights, something remarkable happened. They saw each other, not through the lenses of memory or guilt, but as two people who had survived themselves, who had cracked, healed, and rebuilt from the inside out. By the time the sun hinted at the horizon, casting faint lavender light through the blinds, Everett looked at her with a new kind of reverence. You know, he said, if I could go back to that scared, arrogant boy I used to be, I'd tell him that one day the girl he never saw would become the woman he couldn't stop seeing. Fran smiled softly, stirred her coffee, and whispered, and I'd tell that girl he wasn't worth crying over back then. Then she reached across the table and took his hand, not out of need, but out of choice. And in that simple gesture, every chapter of the past closed quietly behind them. Because sometimes the most beautiful ending isn't revenge or glory or applause. It's dignity. It's truth. And it's choosing love only when you no longer need it to feel whole. What I love most about this ending is its quiet power. It doesn't rely on a grand cinematic twist or a dramatic public kiss. Instead, it delivers something far more meaningful. Two people meeting each other not as who they were, but as who they've become. Fran's arc is especially powerful because she doesn't seek revenge or validation. She reclaims her narrative not by proving herself to anyone else, but by honoring the girl she used to be. That kind of transformation, turning pain into strength without losing your softness, is rare and deeply human. Everett's redemption doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from listening, acknowledging, and surrendering ego. His evolution feels earned, and his willingness to be humbled makes him worthy of the connection that blooms in the final scene. In the end, this story isn't just about beauty or memory or even forgiveness. It's about wholeness. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs the approval of others to stand tall. And when two whole people finally meet, not to fix each other but to walk side by side, that's where love truly begins. That's why the ending works. Because it's not flashy, it's honest, and honesty always lands the deepest.